You're 26 years old, sitting at what you thought was a family reconciliation dinner, when your own stepfather looks you dead in the eye and says, "Sindy, you're not welcome here anymore." The entire table goes silent. Your half-siblings nod in agreement. Your mother says nothing. 3 years later, you're signing the deed to buy the very restaurant where that humiliation happened, and every single one of them is working for minimum wage while struggling to pay rent. This is the true story of how rejection became my rocket fuel. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sindy Steel, and if you had told me 5 years ago that I'd own a chain of upscale dining establishments across Colorado, I would have laughed until I cried. Back then, I was just another community college graduate working double shifts at a Denver coffee shop, living in a studio apartment that was so small I could touch both walls with my arms stretched out. I grew up in Littleton, Colorado, in what looked like a perfect suburban family from the outside. My biological father died in a car accident when I was 8, and 2 years later, my mother Patricia married Richard Hartwell, a successful insurance broker who owned a beautiful house in the suburbs. Richard came with 2 kids of his own, Jessica, who was 3 years older than me, and Marcus, who was my age. On paper, it should have been the Brady Bunch. In reality, it was more like a Cold War with occasional ceasefires. Richard never quite saw me as his daughter. I was Patricia's baggage, the reminder that she had a life before him. He provided for me, I'll give him that, but there was always this invisible line between his kids and me. Jessica inherited his sharp business mind and his connections. She landed internships at his firm straight out of high school and was groomed for success from day one. Marcus got the athletic attention, the father-son bonding, the college fund that seemed to magically appear when it was time for applications. Me, I got polite tolerance and the constant reminder that I should be grateful for what I had. When I graduated high school, there was no college fund waiting. We've invested so much in Jessica's business education and Marcus's football career, Richard explained during one of our rare one-on-one conversations. Community college is a smart choice for you, Sindy. More practical. The way he said practical made it sound like a consolation prize. So while Jessica was studying at University of Denver's business school and Marcus was playing football at Colorado State, I was taking general education classes at Red Rocks Community College and working nights at Been There, Done That, a trendy coffee shop in downtown Denver. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was serving overpriced lattes to people who probably made more in a day than I made in a month. My manager, Dave Rodriguez, was this 40-something former chef who'd burned out of high-end restaurants and found peace in the simpler world of coffee and pastries. He saw something in me that my own family didn't. "Steele," he'd always call me by my last name, "you've got hustle. And you've got this thing where you remember every regular customer's order after meeting them twice. That's not common." Dave started teaching me about the food service industry during slow afternoons. He'd explain profit margins, supplier relationships, the difference between good customer service and exceptional hospitality. He'd tell me, most people think restaurants are about food, but really, they're about making people feel something. The food is just the vehicle. I soaked it up like a sponge. For the first time in my life, someone was treating me like I had potential beyond just getting by. Dave even let me experiment with creating new drink combinations during the slow morning hours. My honey lavender latte became the shop's second bestseller, and seeing customers specifically request that drink the blonde girl invented gave me a rush I'd never experienced before. Meanwhile, the family dinners at the Hartwell house became increasingly uncomfortable. Jessica would regale everyone with stories about her internship successes and networking events. Marcus would share updates about his sports achievements and his plans for sports management. When the spotlight inevitably turned to me, I'd mention work or school, only to watch Richard's eyes glaze over with barely concealed disinterest. "Oh, that's nice, dear," Patricia would say with a smile that never quite reached her eyes.
She'd learned to navigate Richard's preferences over the years, and unfortunately, that meant minimizing anything that might make him uncomfortable, including her own daughter's accomplishments.
The breaking point started building during my second year at community college. I decided to major in business administration, partly inspired by Dave's informal education, and partly because I wanted to prove I could succeed in the same field as Jessica. I was working nearly full-time while maintaining a 3.8 GPA. But instead of recognition, I got lectures about focus and realistic expectations. "You know, Sindy," Richard said during one particularly memorable Sunday dinner, "there's nothing wrong with service industry work. Some people are just built for different things." He said it with the same tone you might use to console someone about not making the varsity team. Not everyone needs to be a business owner or a corporate executive. Jessica nodded sagely, as if this was profound wisdom. "It's actually really admirable how hard you work at the coffee shop, Sindy. I could never do that kind of work." The condescension was suffocating, but what hurt more was my mother's silence. She'd sit there, cutting her food into precise pieces, occasionally nodding along with Richard's observations about my realistic future. The woman who used to tell me I could be anything I wanted when I was little had been slowly reprogrammed to see me through Richard's eyes. I started declining family dinner invitations, claiming work conflicts or study schedules. It was easier than sitting through another evening of being treated like the family's charitable case. But avoidance only delayed the inevitable confrontation. The restaurant where it all came to a head was called Meridian Grill, an upscale steakhouse in Cherry Creek that Richard loved because it made him feel important. The servers knew him by name, the manager would stop by the table to chat, and the wine list was extensive enough for him to show off his sophisticated palate. It was his favorite place to take business clients and celebrate family milestones. 3 months before that fateful dinner, I had achieved something I was genuinely proud of. I'd not only graduated from Red Rocks Community College with highest honors, but I'd also been accepted to transfer to University of Colorado Denver's business program with a partial scholarship. Even better, Dave had promoted me to assistant manager at Been There, Done That, and I was finally making enough money to move out of my cramped studio into a decent one-bedroom apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. I thought, naively, that this might be the moment my family would finally see me differently. When Patricia called to invite me to a celebration dinner at Meridian Grill, I actually felt hopeful for the first time in years. Maybe they were finally ready to acknowledge that I wasn't the failure they'd made me out to be. The reservation was set for Saturday night at 7 o'clock. I spent an embarrassing amount of money on a new dress, a sleek black number that made me feel confident and professional. I even splurged on getting my hair done at a salon instead of the usual DIY trim in my bathroom mirror. Looking back, I realize I was armor-plating myself for battle without even knowing a war was coming. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. That Saturday evening at Meridian Grill started beautifully. The hostess, a woman named Claire, who I'd later get to know very well, seated us at Richard's usual table, a prime spot near the window with a view of Cherry Creek's upscale shopping district. The warm lighting cast everything in a golden glow, and for a moment, I felt like I belonged in this world of white tablecloths and sommelier recommendations. Richard ordered his usual bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon, something expensive that he always mispronounced but nobody ever corrected. Jessica looked stunning, as always, wearing what I later learned was a $400 blazer from Nordstrom. Marcus had driven down from Fort Collins for the occasion, still carrying that easy, athletic confidence that had always made everything seem effortless for him. Mom sat beside Richard, perfectly made up and smiling that careful smile she'd perfected over the years. The first 30 minutes were actually pleasant. We talked about Jessica's recent promotion to senior analyst at Richard's firm. She was only 29 and already making 6 figures. Marcus shared stories about his new job coaching high school football while pursuing his master's degree in sports administration. The conversation flowed easily around topics that made everyone comfortable. When the appetizers arrived, Richard always insisted on ordering for the table. I finally worked up the courage to share my news. I have some exciting updates too, I said, trying to match Jessica's confident tone. I graduated summa cum laude from Red Rocks, and I've been accepted to UC Denver's business program with a partial scholarship. The reaction wasn't what I expected. Instead of congratulations, there was this awkward pause. Richard set down his wine glass and gave me what I can only describe as a patronizing smile. "That's nice, Sindy," he said, the same way you might compliment a child's crayon drawing. "Though I have to ask, how are you planning to pay for the rest? UC Denver isn't exactly cheap, even with partial assistance." I felt my cheeks burn, but I pushed forward. "I've been promoted to assistant manager at Been There, Done That. The pay increase, combined with my scholarship and some student loans, should cover everything. Plus, I'm looking into additional grants for non-traditional students." "Student loans?" Richard repeated, shaking his head. "Sindy, you're already, 23? By the time you graduate and pay off those loans, you'll be pushing 30 and just starting your career. Meanwhile, Jessica here is already establishing herself in the real business world." "Actually, I'm 24, I corrected quietly, though I immediately regretted speaking up. "Even worse," Richard continued, warming to his theme. "Look, I admire your determination, but there's a difference between realistic goals and pipe dreams. Community college was good for you. It gave you structure, taught you some basic skills, but a 4-year business degree? That's a significant investment with no guarantee of return." Marcus, who had been quietly working on his steak, looked up with what seemed like genuine concern. "Sindy, don't you think you should focus on building experience in your current job? I mean, assistant manager is pretty good for someone without a full degree." "That's exactly my point," Richard said, his voice gaining momentum. "You're doing well at the coffee shop. Dave speaks highly of you whenever I see him at the country club. Why risk that stability for something so uncertain?" I felt like I was drowning in their collective skepticism, but I tried one more time. "I'm not giving up my job. I'll work while I study. And it's not uncertain. I have a clear plan. I want to understand business operations, maybe eventually open my own place." The words died in my throat as I saw Richard's expression change. The patronizing smile vanished, replaced with something much colder. "Your own place?" He leaned back in his chair, and I could feel the temperature at the table drop several degrees. "Sindy, I think we need to have a serious conversation about expectations here." Jessica and Marcus exchanged a look that I couldn't quite read. Mom suddenly became very interested in her salmon. "The thing is," Richard continued, his voice taking on the tone he used when explaining complex insurance policies to confused clients, "there's a difference between being supportive and enabling unrealistic fantasies. We've been patient, very patient, with your various phases. First it was art classes in high school, then you wanted to be a teacher, now it's business ownership. At some point, you need to accept who you are and work within those limitations."
"What limitations?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Come on, Sindy." Jessica's voice was gentle but devastating. "You're not like us. You don't have the connections, the background, I don't know how to say this nicely, the natural business instinct. There's nothing wrong with that, but opening a restaurant? Do you have any idea how many restaurants fail in their first year?" "Over 60%, Marcus added helpfully. "We studied it in one of my business classes." I felt something cracking inside my chest. "So you think I should just give up? Accept that I'll never amount to anything more than serving coffee?" The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. "We think you should be realistic about your strengths. You're good with people. You're reliable. You work hard. Those are valuable qualities in the service industry. There's dignity in honest work, Sindy. Not everyone needs to be an entrepreneur." "But Jessica gets to be. Marcus gets to pursue his dreams. Why is it different for me?" Richard's jaw tightened. Because Jessica has demonstrated business acumen from an early age. She understood complex financial concepts before she was 16. Marcus has leadership qualities. You can see it in how his players respond to him. They have natural aptitudes that align with their goals. And I don't? You have different aptitudes, Mom spoke up for the first time, her voice so quiet I almost missed it. You're good at making people feel comfortable, at remembering their orders and their names. That's a gift too, honey. The condescension in her tone, honey, like I was still 5 years old, was somehow worse than Richard's direct dismissal. I see, I said slowly. The restaurant around us continued humming with conversation and clinking glasses, but our table felt like it existed in its own bubble of tension. So you invited me to a celebration dinner. You meant celebrating Jessica's promotion. This was never about my achievements. Your graduation is an achievement, Richard said quickly. We're proud that you finished community college. That's more than a lot of people do. But it's not worth celebrating the same way Jessica's promotion is? Another uncomfortable silence. Sindy, Richard's voice took on a sharper edge. I think your problem is that you've never learned to appreciate what you have. We've provided for you, supported you, included you in this family, but nothing is ever enough. You always want more, want something different, want to be something you're not. I want to be treated like I matter, I said, my voice cracking. Of course you matter, Jessica said quickly, but you matter as yourself, not as some fantasy version of yourself that doesn't exist. That's when Richard delivered the blow that changed everything. The truth is, Sindy, he said, leaning forward with the expression of someone delivering tough love, we've been enabling this behavior for too long. These grandiose plans, this refusal to accept reality, it's not healthy. And frankly, it's not fair for us to have to constantly manage your disappointment when things don't work out the way you've imagined. I stared at him, feeling like I was seeing him clearly for the first time in years. What are you saying? Richard glanced at Jessica and Marcus, then back at me. We think it's time you learn to stand on your own feet. Really stand on your own feet. No more family dinners where we have to pretend your latest scheme is realistic. No more emotional support for projects that are doomed to fail. You need to grow up, Sindy. The restaurant noise faded to a distant hum. Are you cutting me off? We're setting boundaries, Jessica said gently, for everyone's sake, including yours. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to say something, anything to defend me. She was staring at her hands folded in her lap. Mom! She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. Maybe it's for the best, sweetheart. Maybe some distance will help you figure out who you really are. And that's when Richard said the words that would echo in my head for the next 3 years. You're not welcome here anymore, Sindy. It's time to stop pretending we're something we're not.
I don't remember paying the check or walking to my car. I don't remember the drive home through Denver's weekend traffic or climbing the stairs to my Capitol Hill apartment. What I do remember is sitting on my thrift store couch at 11:30 p.m., still wearing that expensive black dress, staring at my phone and realizing I had absolutely no one to call. The isolation hit me like a physical blow. I'd never realized how much of my social world revolved around family obligations until they were suddenly gone. My college friends had scattered after graduation, most moving back home or to other cities. My work relationships, while friendly, didn't extend much beyond being there, done that's 4 walls. I was 24 years old and completely alone in a way I'd never experienced before. The next morning, I called in sick to work, something I'd never done without actually being sick. Dave didn't ask questions, just told me to feel better and get some rest. But rest was impossible. I spent the entire day pacing my small apartment, alternating between rage and despair. One minute, I'd be furious at their audacity. The next, I'd be questioning everything about myself. Were they right? Was I delusional about my potential?
By Monday, I'd made a decision that surprised even me. I wasn't going to collapse. I wasn't going to prove them right by giving up. Instead, I was going to prove them so spectacularly wrong that they'd choke on their condescension. The first step was doubling down on my UC Denver application. I'd been cautious in my original plans, thinking about part-time enrollment to maintain work-life balance. Now, I threw caution to the wind and applied for full-time status, additional scholarships, and every grant program the university offered. If they thought I couldn't handle the financial pressure, I'd show them exactly what I was capable of. But the practical realities hit hard and fast. My partial scholarship covered about 40% of tuition, and even with my assistant manager salary, the math didn't work. I needed approximately $18,000 more per year to make it happen. Student loans would cover most of it, but the debt load was terrifying. Without family support, financial or emotional, every safety net had disappeared. Dave noticed my distraction by Wednesday. "Steel, you've been making drinks like you're on autopilot," he said during our afternoon lull. "What's weighing at you?" I found myself telling him everything. The dinner, the confrontation, my plans for UC Denver, the financial challenges. Dave listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making small sounds of understanding. "Family can be complicated," he said finally, "especially when they can't see past their own limitations." He paused, wiping down the espresso machine with deliberate care. I've been thinking about expanding our evening hours, maybe adding some light dinner options, wine service. I'd need someone I trust to help develop and manage that side of the business." The offer came with a significant pay increase, enough to make UC Denver financially feasible, barely. But more importantly, it came with something I desperately needed, someone who believed in my potential. "There's one condition," he added with a slight smile. "You have to let me teach you the real restaurant business. Not just coffee shop operations, but food costs, inventory management, vendor relationships, staff scheduling. Consider it your practical business education." I threw myself into both challenges with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Days became a blur of morning classes at UC Denver, afternoon shifts at Being Here Done That, and evenings developing Dave's dinner concept. I studied financial management and marketing theory at school, then applied those concepts immediately in our real-world laboratory. The dinner service launch was my first taste of how brutal the restaurant industry could be. Our initial menu was ambitious, but poorly executed. The kitchen equipment wasn't designed for full meal preparation, leading to inconsistent cooking times and frustrated customers. Our wine selection, carefully curated based on profit margins rather than customer preferences, resulted in frequent substitution requests and disappointed patrons. The worst night was our second week of dinner service. We'd booked a party of 12 for a birthday celebration, our largest yet. Everything that could go wrong did. The main course took 45 minutes longer than promised because our single oven couldn't handle the volume. 2 bottles of wine had gone bad, forcing awkward conversations about alternatives. The birthday cake I special ordered arrived crushed, apparently dropped during delivery. The party left after paying for their drinks, but before receiving their entrees. The birthday woman, clearly embarrassed in front of her friends, left a Yelp review the next day that was so scathing, it made my stomach hurt to read it. "Ambitious but completely unprofessional. Save your money and go somewhere that actually knows what they're doing," she wrote. I wanted to quit that night. The humiliation felt too familiar. Too much like that dinner at Meridian Grill where I'd been dismissed as unrealistic and unprepared. Maybe Richard was right. Maybe I was in over my head, playing at being a businesswoman without the skills to back it up.
But Dave had a different perspective. "Steel, you know what separates successful restaurateurs from failed ones?" he asked as we cleaned up the disaster. "It's not avoiding mistakes. Everyone makes them. It's learning from them fast enough to survive." He was right, but the learning curve was steep and expensive. Our dinner service was hemorrhaging money, and the poor reviews were affecting our coffee business during the day. Regular customers started avoiding us during evening hours, and some questioned whether we were losing focus on what we did well. 3 weeks after the birthday party disaster, Dave called me into his office for what I assumed would be a conversation about cutting our losses. Instead, he spread out financial reports across his desk. "We're down about $3,000 on the dinner experiment," he said, matter-of-factly. "Food costs are running 35% instead of the 28% we projected. Labor costs are inflated because we're overstaffed for the volume we're actually serving. And our customer retention for dinner service is running about 20%, which is unsustainable." I felt my heart sink. "So we're shutting it down?" "No," Dave said, looking up with that same expression he'd worn when he first offered to teach me the business. "We're fixing it. But first, you need to understand something about failure in this industry. Every successful restaurant owner I've ever known has at least one spectacular failure in their past. The difference between the ones who make it and the ones who don't isn't talent or luck. It's the willingness to stare failure in the face and figure out exactly what went wrong." Over the next 2 weeks, we conducted what Dave called a failure autopsy. We analyzed every aspect of our dinner service: menu design, pricing strategy, kitchen workflow, staff training, customer experience, marketing approach. The list of problems was overwhelming, but for the first time, I could see patterns and solutions instead of just chaos. The biggest revelation was that we'd been trying to be something we weren't. Instead of building on been there, done that strength, intimate atmosphere, personal service, attention to detail, we'd tried to compete with full-service restaurants using inferior equipment and limited space. "What if we focused on what we do best?" I suggested during one of our late-night planning sessions. "Small plates, wine pairings, dessert courses. Make it feel exclusive rather than trying to be everything to everyone." Dave smiled. "Now you're thinking like a restaurateur." The revised concept was simpler but more sophisticated. Instead of full dinners, we offered curated small plate experiences with wine pairings, focusing on local ingredients and artisan preparation. The limited menu allowed us to perfect each dish, and the smaller portions were better suited to our kitchen capabilities. More importantly, I was learning to think systematically about every aspect of the business. How do you price a menu item to ensure profitability while remaining competitive? How do you schedule staff to provide excellent service without wasting labor costs? How do you build customer loyalty in an industry where people have endless options? But even as the business side began clicking into place, the personal challenges continued mounting. UC Denver was academically demanding, and balancing full-time coursework with nearly full-time work was taking its toll. I was surviving on 4 hours of sleep and too much caffeine, maintaining a 3.4 GPA, but feeling constantly behind. Worse, the complete radio silence from my family was becoming psychologically exhausting. No birthday calls, no holiday invitations, no casual check-ins. It was as if I'd been erased from their lives entirely. Sometimes I'd catch myself almost calling Mom, then remember that I was not welcome anymore. The isolation was made worse by social media. Jessica regularly posted about family gatherings I was no longer invited to, Marcus shared photos from Sunday dinners at the house where I'd grown up, and Mom's posts showed a perfectly happy family of 4. Seeing their lives continue seamlessly without me was a daily reminder of how easily I'd been discarded. 6 months after that dinner at Meridian Grill, I was surviving but barely thriving. The revised dinner service was breaking even, my grades were acceptable if not stellar, and I was learning valuable skills. But I was also exhausted, lonely, and increasingly angry. That anger, I was beginning to realize, might be the most valuable resource I had. The call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in November, jolting me awake after another 4-hour night. Dave's voice was strained in a way I'd never heard before. "Steel, I need you to get to the shop immediately. Don't ask questions, just come." I threw on yesterday's clothes and drove through Denver's early morning traffic with a growing knot in my stomach. When I arrived at Been There, Done That, I found Dave standing in front of our espresso machine with a man in a cheap suit who was taking photographs of everything. "Health department," Dave said grimly. "Anonymous complaint. They're citing us for 17 violations." 17 violations? The number hit me like a physical blow. I watched the inspector document everything from allegedly improper food storage temperatures to inadequate hand washing facilities. Most of the citations were minor, things that could be fixed with better procedures and some equipment adjustments. But 3 were serious enough to potentially shut us down. The hot water temperature in your kitchen sink is running 15 degrees below regulation, the inspector explained with the bored efficiency of someone who delivered this news countless times before. Your refrigeration units are inconsistent. This one's running at 44 degrees instead of 38. And your grease trap hasn't been professionally cleaned in over 6 months. Each violation came with a fine. When the inspector finished his assessment and handed Dave the official citation, the total was $8,400. For a small coffee shop that was just breaking even on dinner service, it might as well have been $84,000. We have 2 weeks to correct the violations and pay the fines, Dave said, after the inspector left. I stared at the citation, my mind racing through the implications. Without our food service license, we'd lose the dinner service entirely. More importantly, the legal cloud hanging over us would likely scare away our regular coffee customers too. We'd be finished. Who would report us? I asked, though deep down I suspected I already knew the answer. Dave's expression was grim. Someone who knows our operation well enough to identify specific vulnerabilities. This wasn't a random inspection, Steel. These citations are too targeted, too specific. Later that afternoon, I did something I swore I wouldn't do. I drove past Richard's insurance office. His BMW was in its usual parking spot, and through the window I could see him laughing with Jessica at her desk. They looked so comfortable, so confident in their world of clean offices and steady paychecks. The contrast with my situation was stark. While they were discussing insurance policies and quarterly projections, I was facing the potential collapse of everything I had worked for over the past 8 months. The timing felt too convenient to be coincidental, especially given Richard's connections throughout Denver's business community. But I couldn't prove anything, and even if I could, it wouldn't solve our immediate crisis. We needed $8,400 plus the cost of repairs and equipment upgrades. My personal savings account held exactly $347.22. Dave's resources were tied up in the business, and taking out a loan would require collateral we didn't have. That's when I learned about predatory lending in the restaurant industry. A man named Tony Castellano reached out to us 3 days after the health department citation. He'd somehow heard about our situation and offered an immediate solution. $15,000 in cash, available within 24 hours, no credit check required. The terms should have been a red flag. The interest rate was 18%, monthly. Not annually, monthly. If we couldn't pay it back within 6 months, Castellano would assume ownership of 51% of being there, done that. But when you're drowning, even a concrete life preserver looks appealing. Don't do it, my business law professor warned me when I brought the contract to class for advice. This is exactly how legitimate businesses get taken over by people who prey on desperation. Find another way. But what other way was there? Traditional banks wouldn't touch a restaurant loan for a business that had been cited by the health department. Friends and family loans weren't an option, given my current family situation. Crowdfunding seemed both slow and too unlikely to succeed. Dave and I spent 3 sleepless nights exploring alternatives. We considered selling the dinner service equipment, but it wouldn't generate enough cash. We looked into business credit cards, but the interest rates were almost as predatory as Castellano's loan. We even discussed closing down temporarily and reopening after we could afford the necessary upgrades, but the loss of customer base would likely be permanent. Finally, with 5 days left until our deadline, I made a decision that still makes my stomach twist when I think about it. I called Castellano and accepted his terms. "Smart choice," he said with an oily satisfaction that made my skin crawl. "I'll have the papers drawn up and the cash ready by tomorrow afternoon." The signing meeting took place in a strip mall office that smelled like stale cigarettes and broken dreams. Castellano was exactly what I had expected. Gold chains, expensive suit that didn't quite fit, and the predatory smile of someone who knew he had me exactly where he wanted me.
6 months, he repeated as I signed page after page of legal documents I barely understood. If you can't pay back the principal plus interest by then, I become majority owner. Nothing personal, you understand, just business. Walking out of that office with a briefcase full of cash felt like selling my soul, but it also felt like survival. We paid the health department fines, upgraded our equipment, and implemented new procedures that would prevent future violations. Being There, Done That reopened its dinner service 3 weeks later with a spotless health department rating. But the financial pressure was crushing. The loan payments consumed nearly 60% of our monthly profits, leaving almost nothing for my personal expenses or business growth. I was back to surviving on ramen noodles and generic coffee, wearing the same 3 outfits on rotation because I couldn't afford new clothes. Worse, the stress was affecting my academic performance. My GPA dropped from 3.4 to 2.8 as I struggled to balance increasingly demanding coursework with the pressure of saving a business that was barely staying afloat. My marketing professor, Dr. Sarah Chen, pulled me aside after I turned in a particularly rushed assignment. "Sindy, your early work showed real promise," she said gently, "but lately you seem to be going through the motions. Is everything okay?" I wanted to tell her everything about the family rejection, the health department crisis, the predatory loan that was slowly strangling our business. Instead, I just nodded and promised to do better. How could I explain that I was fighting for survival while my classmates worried about internship applications and spring break plans? The isolation was becoming unbearable. I'd see other students grabbing dinner together or complaining about their parents' expectations, and I'd feel this hollow ache where my family connections used to be. During Thanksgiving break, while everyone else went home, I worked double shifts and studied alone in my apartment. 3 months into the Castellano loan, our financial situation had actually worsened. The high monthly payments meant we couldn't invest in marketing or menu improvements that might have increased our customer base. We were trapped in a cycle where we made just enough money to survive, but not enough to thrive. That's when Dave dropped another bombshell. "I've been offered a job," he said during one of our late-night accounting sessions. "Head chef position at a new restaurant in Boulder. The salary is double what I'm making here, plus benefits and equity opportunities." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Are you leaving?" "I don't want to," Dave said carefully. "But Sindy, we both know the math here. Even if we somehow manage to pay off Castellano, this business model isn't sustainable long term. We're working 70-hour weeks to break even. That's not a business. That's an expensive hobby." He was right, and we both knew it. Being There, Done That was slowly dying, suffocated by debt and limited growth potential. But it was also the only thing standing between me and complete failure. "What if I bought you out?" I heard myself say. "Took on full ownership and responsibility." Dave looked at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. With what money? And more importantly, with what experience? Running a business solo while finishing college is a recipe for disaster. But disaster was already here. The question was whether I had the courage to double down or the wisdom to walk away. As I stared at our books that night, showing red numbers in almost every column, I realized that my family had been right about one thing. I was in way over my head. The difference was that I was no longer the same person who had sat at that dinner table 9 months ago. I'd learned that failure wasn't fatal, that pride was a luxury I couldn't afford, and that sometimes the only way out was through. I just had to figure out what through looked like before Castellano's 6-month deadline arrived and took even that choice away from me. The eviction notice was taped to my apartment door when I got home from my final exam in December. Bright yellow paper with bold black letters that might as well have been a death sentence. Notice to quit, 72 hours to vacate. I'd been so focused on keeping Been There, Done That afloat that I'd fallen 3 months behind on rent. My landlord, Mrs. Chen, had been patient initially, but patience doesn't pay her mortgage. The notice was for $3,600 in back rent plus late fees, money I simply didn't have. Standing in my hallway with that paper in my hands, I felt something break inside me. Not the dramatic movie moment kind of breaking, but the quiet, exhausted surrender of someone who'd finally reached the end of their rope. I slumped against the wall and started laughing. the kind of bitter, hollow laughter that comes when you realize the universe might actually have a sense of humor after all. Dave had accepted the Boulder job offer 2 weeks earlier. His last day was Christmas Eve, which felt like cosmic cruelty. He'd offered to sell me his share of Been There, Done That for $5,000, well below market value and essentially a gift. But I didn't have $5,000. I didn't have $500. After paying Castellano's loan installments, health department fines, and business expenses, my personal finances were in ruins. The final semester of my junior year had been an academic disaster. My GPA had plummeted to 2.3, putting my financial aid in jeopardy. 2 professors had reached out expressing concern about my declining performance, but I'd been too proud to explain my situation. How do you tell your marketing professor that you can't complete assignments because you're working 80-hour weeks trying to save a failing business from a loan shark? Without Dave's experience and credibility, Been There, Done That's dinner service had collapsed entirely. Our regular coffee customers were also disappearing, scared off by inconsistent hours and my increasingly frazzled appearance. We'd gone from breaking even to losing money daily, and the Castellano loan payments were due whether we had revenue or not. 2 days before Christmas, I did something I'd sworn I'd never do. I called my mother. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice carefully neutral. "Hello, Sindy?" "Mom, The words stuck in my throat. How do you ask for help from people who'd explicitly told you that you weren't welcome in their lives anymore? Is everything okay?" Despite everything, there was still concern in her voice. "No," I admitted, my voice cracking. "Everything's falling apart. I'm about to lose my apartment, the business is failing, and I don't know what to do." The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, she sighed. "Honey, we talked about this. You need to learn to handle things on your own. This is exactly what Richard was worried about, that you'd take on more than you could handle and then expect us to bail you out. I'm not asking you to bail me out, though that's exactly what I was doing. I need advice, or maybe just someone to talk to. I don't have anyone else. You have Dave. Dave's leaving. His last day is tomorrow." Another long pause. "Sindy, what do you want me to say? We've been clear about our boundaries. This situation, the debt, the failing business, the academic problems, this is exactly what we were trying to help you avoid. By cutting me off completely? By encouraging you to be realistic about your capabilities." Her voice was getting colder, more distant. "Honey, I know this hurts, but sometimes the kindest thing is to let people learn from their mistakes instead of enabling them." I felt something die inside me during that conversation. The last fragile hope that my family might still care enough to help during a genuine crisis was finally extinguished. "I understand," I said quietly. "I won't call again." "Sindy, wait!" But I'd already hung up. That night, I sat in my nearly empty apartment. I'd already sold most of my furniture to make loan payments and faced facts. I had less than $200 to my name, nowhere to live in 48 hours, a failing business with crushing debt, and academic probation looming. I was 25 years old and completely alone. For the first time since that dinner at Meridian Grill, I seriously considered giving up. Not just on the business or school, but on everything. I could abandon the lease, let Castellano take Been There, Done That, drop out of UC Denver, and start over somewhere else with a clean slate. Maybe Richard had been right all along. Maybe I really wasn't cut out for this level of responsibility. I spent Christmas Eve alone in the empty coffee shop, ostensibly doing inventory, but really just avoiding the reality waiting for me at home. Dave had already cleaned out his personal items and said his goodbyes. The keys to his apartment were sitting on the counter next to a card that simply said, "Don't give up, Steel. You're stronger than you know." That's when I discovered the envelope he'd left in the register. Inside was $2,000 in cash and a handwritten note. "Emergency fund. Pay me back when you can, but don't you dare use this to quit. Use it to fight back. D." The money was exactly enough to avoid eviction and keep the lights on for another month. It wasn't a solution, but it was a bridge. More importantly, it was proof that someone still believed in me when I'd stopped believing in myself. But even with Dave's gift, the fundamental problems remained. I was now the sole owner of a failing business with a predatory loan that would come due in 2 months. My academic standing was precarious, my personal finances were in ruins, and I had no safety net left. The week between Christmas and New Year's was the longest of my life. I worked alone in Been There, Done That, serving the handful of customers who still trusted us, while trying to figure out how to salvage anything from the wreckage. The coffee shop felt like a mausoleum, too quiet, too empty, haunted by the ghost of what it used to be. On New Year's Eve, I closed early and walked through downtown Denver, watching people celebrate and kiss at midnight, while I contemplated how spectacularly I'd failed at everything I'd attempted. The contrast was brutal. Couples planning their futures while I couldn't plan past next week. Friends toasting their successes while I nursed a failing business and broken family relationships. That's when I ended up standing outside Meridian Grill. I hadn't planned to go there. I'd just been walking aimlessly through Cherry Creek, and somehow my feet had carried me to the scene of my original humiliation. Through the windows, I could see families celebrating, couples sharing expensive bottles of wine, business people closing deals over prime rib. It looked exactly the same as it had 18 months earlier, when Richard had delivered his devastating assessment of my limitations. Same warm lighting, same white tablecloths, same sense of prosperity and success that I'd never be allowed to join. Standing there in the cold, wearing a coat I'd bought at Goodwill because I couldn't afford anything else, I felt the full weight of how far I had fallen. My family was probably in there right now celebrating Jessica's latest promotion or Marcus's coaching success, proving once again that life went on perfectly well without me. But as I stood there, something shifted. The despair I'd been carrying for months began transforming into something else, something harder and more focused. Maybe it was hitting absolute rock bottom. Maybe it was the clarity that comes when you have nothing left to lose. Or maybe it was just stubborn refusal to let Richard's prophecy come true. I pulled out my phone and called Tony Castellano. "I need an extension on the loan," I said when he answered, "and I need to discuss modified terms." Castellano laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. "Princess, you're not in a position to negotiate. You've got 6 weeks to pay me back or I take the business. Those were the terms you agreed to. What if I could guarantee double the return? Give me 6 months instead of 6 weeks, and I'll pay you back $30,000 instead of $18,000. The line went quiet. "You don't have $30,000. "Not yet," I admitted, "but I know how to get it." It was a complete bluff. I had no idea how to generate that kind of money in 6 months. But standing outside Meridian Grill, looking at the world that had rejected me, I realized that my lowest point could also be my launching point. I just had to figure out how to bounce.
Castellano agreed to the modified terms, probably because he thought I was delusional and would default anyway, giving him the business for even less effort. But his agreement bought me something invaluable: time to execute the plan that had crystallized during my lowest moment outside Meridian Grill. The next morning, January 1st, I did something that would have terrified the old Sindy. I enrolled in an intensive real estate licensing course. If I was going to generate $30,000 in 6 months while rebuilding Been There, Done That, I needed a scalable income source. Real estate commissions could provide exactly that. The licensing course was brutal, 120 hours of instruction crammed into 8 weeks, all while maintaining the coffee shop and finishing my college semester. But I learned something important during my year of failure. Desperation is the world's greatest motivator. When your survival depends on success, you find energy reserves you never knew existed. I studied real estate law on my lunch breaks, practiced sales techniques with coffee shop customers, and memorized market data while restocking inventory. My day started at 5 a.m. and ended after midnight.
but for the first time in months, I felt like I was moving forward instead of just surviving. The breakthrough came during week 3 of real estate school. Our instructor, Maria Santos, was a powerhouse agent who'd built a multi-million-dollar business from nothing. During a break, she mentioned that she was looking for an ambitious new agent to join her team. The restaurant industry taught you customer service, problem-solving under pressure, and financial management, she said after I'd pitched myself shamelessly. Those skills translate perfectly to real estate. Plus, you've got that hunger I can spot from across the room. Maria offered me a position with her firm before I'd even passed the licensing exam. The base salary was modest, but the commission structure was generous, and she promised to mentor me personally. More importantly, she understood my timeline constraints and agreed to give me flexible scheduling to maintain been there, done that. I passed the real estate exam on my first attempt with a score of 94%. Within 2 weeks, I'd closed my first deal, a downtown condo sale that netted me $4,200 in commission. The check felt like validation that I could succeed in a completely different industry, proof that my skills were transferable and valuable. But my real plan was bigger than just making commission money. During my months of struggle, I'd noticed something about Denver's restaurant scene. Location was everything. And prime locations were controlled by a small group of property owners who could make or break new businesses. Richard Hartwell owned commercial real estate. So did several of his business associates. They controlled the game by controlling the board, and I'd been playing as their victim for too long. By March, I was selling real estate during the day and rebuilding Been There, Done That at night. The coffee shop was slowly recovering under my solo management, helped by my new understanding of customer psychology from real estate training. I'd learned to read what people really wanted versus what they said they wanted, and that skill transformed how I approached menu development and customer service. More importantly, I was networking with commercial property developers, restaurant investors, and business owners who controlled Denver's hospitality landscape. Every real estate client became a potential business connection. Every property showing was an opportunity to learn about market dynamics and investment strategies. The first major breakthrough came during when I helped a client purchase a historic building in Lodo. During the closing process, I learned that the building's previous tenant, an upscale Italian restaurant, had defaulted on their lease due to mismanagement, not market conditions. The location was prime, the kitchen was fully equipped, and the landlord was desperate to find a new tenant. I presented a business plan that night. My real estate commissions had grown to nearly $8,000 per month by April, giving me both the financial credibility and actual resources to pursue bigger opportunities. I propose taking over the failed restaurant's lease, converting it into an upscale dinner concept that would complement rather than compete with Been There, Done That. The landlord was skeptical until I showed him my financial projections, backed by real market data from my real estate work. I also brought letters of recommendation from my real estate clients, many of whom were successful business owners themselves. The combination of hard numbers and social proof convinced him to take a chance. By May, I was simultaneously running Been There, Done That, selling real estate, and developing what would become Steel and Vine, a farm-to-table restaurant focused on locally sourced ingredients and artisanal wine pairings. The name was deliberate. Steel represented my resilience. Vine represented growth and connection. The restaurant industry knowledge I gained during my failures became the foundation for my success. I knew exactly what mistakes to avoid because I'd made most of them already. I understood food costs, labor management, customer retention, and operational efficiency, not from textbooks, but from painful experience. Steel and Vine opened in August, exactly 6 months after my modified agreement with Castellano. The opening week generated enough revenue to pay him back in full, plus the additional $12,000 I'd promised. Walking into his strip mall office with a cashier's check for $30,000 was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. "Didn't think you had it in you," Castellano admitted as he handed over the paperwork that freed Been There, Done That from his predatory grip. "Neither did I replied honestly. But paying off Castellano was just the beginning. Steel and Vine's success created opportunities I'd never imagined.
Within 6 months, I was approached by investors interested in franchising the concept. By the following spring, I was negotiating deals for 3 additional locations across Colorado. The real vindication came 2 years later. I was reviewing expansion plans for Steel and Vine when my assistant mentioned that Meridian Grill was for sale. The owners were retiring, and the asking price was $1.2 million, well within my reach given the success of my restaurant group. I bought it without hesitation. The renovation took 4 months. I kept the elegant atmosphere that Richard loved, but updated everything else. Menu, wine selection, service standards, even the staff uniforms. When we reopened as Meridian Steel, it was both an homage to the original and a complete transformation. The grand reopening was invitation only, and yes, I sent invitations to the Hartwell family. They came. All of them. Richard looked older, diminished somehow in his ill-fitting suit. Jessica seemed nervous, constantly checking her phone. Marcus had put on weight and carried himself with less confidence than I remembered. Mom looked exactly the same, but smaller, as if the years had compressed her somehow. I welcomed them personally at the door, wearing a custom black dress that cost more than my entire wardrobe had 3 years earlier. "Thank you for coming," I said graciously. "I've reserved the best table in the house for you." It was the same table where they'd told me I wasn't welcome anymore. The irony wasn't subtle, but it wasn't cruel either. It was simply true. During dinner, they were polite but uncomfortable. Richard complimented the food. Jessica mentioned how impressed she was with the restaurant's success. Marcus asked about my real estate business. Mom said very little, but watched me with an expression I couldn't quite read. As they prepared to leave, Richard approached me privately. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "We were wrong about you. Completely wrong." "No," I replied, surprising myself with the gentleness in my voice. "You were right about who I was then. You just couldn't see who I was capable of becoming." Today, I own 6 restaurants across Colorado, a successful real estate brokerage, and a consultation firm that helps struggling restaurants turn around their operations. The Steel Group employs over 200 people and generates annual revenue exceeding $15 million. More importantly, I learned that the people who reject you often do you the greatest favor possible. They force you to find strength you didn't know you possessed, and to build success on your own terms rather than their limited vision of your potential. My family and I have rebuilt our relationship, slowly and carefully. It's different now, based on mutual respect rather than obligation. They see me as I am, rather than as they expected me to be. But every time I walk into Meridian Steel, I remember that 26-year-old woman who stood outside in the cold, broke and broken, and somehow found the courage to bet on herself one more time. That bet changed everything.
Success, I discovered, brings its own unique set of problems. 2 years after buying Meridian Steel, I was sitting in my downtown Denver office, a sleek space on the 32nd floor with panoramic mountain views that still sometimes took my breath away, when my lawyer delivered news that would change everything again. "The Henderson Group wants to buy you out," Robert Kim said, sliding a contract across my mahogany desk. "All 6 restaurants, the real estate portfolio, everything. They're offering $18 million. The Henderson Group was exactly the kind of corporate restaurant conglomerate I'd sworn I'd never become. They owned 247 restaurants across 12 states, all operating with the soulless efficiency of fast food chains disguised as upscale dining. Their offer represented more money than I'd ever dreamed of having, enough to retire at 29 and never work another day in my life. They want an answer by Friday," Robert continued. "It's a cash offer, no contingencies. You could be financially free by the end of the month." Financially free. The phrase should have been appealing, but instead it felt like a trap. I'd worked too hard to build something meaningful, to sell it to people who would strip away everything that made my restaurant special. "Set up a meeting," I said finally. "I want to hear their pitch directly." The Henderson Group's representatives arrived the following Tuesday in matching navy suits and identical briefcases.
Their leader, a man named Gregory Henderson III, had the kind of polished confidence that comes from inheriting success rather than earning it. "Miss Steel," he said, with a smile that never reached his eyes, "we've been following your remarkable success story. The Steel Group represents exactly the kind of innovative, locally focused brand we want to add to our portfolio." "And by add to your portfolio, you mean completely standardize and franchise into oblivion?" I asked, not bothering to soften the edge in my voice. Henderson's smile flickered, but held. "We prefer to call it scaling for maximum efficiency. Your farm-to-table concept has proven profitable in the Colorado market. We believe we can replicate that success in Portland, Austin, Nashville, and a dozen other cities." "With locally sourced ingredients?" I pressed. "With regionally appropriate sourcing strategies," he corrected smoothly. "Obviously, we'd need to standardize certain elements, menu consistency, portion control, supply chain optimization, but the core brand identity would remain intact." I spent the rest of the meeting listening to them explain how they'd turn my carefully crafted restaurants into assembly line operations. Standardized recipes, centralized purchasing, reduced staff training, streamlined service protocols. Everything that made Steel and Vine and my other restaurants special would be sacrificed for the sake of scalability and profit margins. "We'll need your answer by Friday," Henderson reminded me as they prepared to leave. "This offer won't remain open indefinitely." That night, I found myself back at the original Been There, Done That, which I'd kept running despite Dave's initial skepticism about maintaining a coffee shop while building a restaurant empire. The space looked exactly the same as it had during my darkest days, but now it served as both a reminder of how far I'd come and a refuge from the pressures of success. My current assistant manager, a 22-year-old named Tyler Rodriguez, Dave's nephew, as it turned out, was closing up when I arrived. "Boss, you okay?" Tyler asked, noting my expression. "You look like someone just told you your favorite restaurant was closing." "Something like that," I said, settling into the same corner booth where Dave used to teach me about profit margins and customer psychology. "Tyler, can I ask you something? What do you think makes this place special?" Tyler considered the question seriously. "I mean, the coffee's great, obviously, but it's more than that. People come here because they feel like they belong. You remember their names, their orders, their stories. Mrs. Patterson comes in every Tuesday because you'll know about her grandson's baseball games. Jim from the construction site stops by because you always have his cortado ready before he even orders. And if someone offered to buy this place and turn it into a corporate chain, that would suck," Tyler said immediately. "It wouldn't be the same place anymore, even if they kept the name and the menu. You can't franchise relationships. You can't franchise relationships." The wisdom of a 22-year-old barista crystallized everything I'd been feeling about the Henderson Group's offer. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with my management team. We gathered in the private dining room at Meridian Steel. Not coincidentally, the same room where my family had once told me I wasn't welcome. "I've received an offer to sell the entire Steel Group," I announced without preamble. $18 million, cash, with the new owners taking over all operations immediately. The reaction was mixed. My CFO, Patricia Valdez, looked intrigued by the financial implications. My head chef, Marcus Chen, no relation to my stepbrother, appeared concerned about what corporate ownership would mean for his creative freedom. And my real estate manager, Jennifer Walsh, remained characteristically analytical. "What are you thinking?" Patricia asked carefully. "I'm thinking about why I started this company in the first place," I said. "It wasn't to get rich, though that's been a nice bonus. It was to prove that I could build something meaningful on my own terms." "And selling for $18 million doesn't prove that?" Jennifer asked. "Selling to people who will destroy everything we've built? No. That feels like giving up. Like admitting that the only value in what we've created is the profit it generates." Marcus nodded emphatically. "The Henderson Group bought out Rustic Table last year. They turned it into a glorified Applebee's with mason jar cocktails. All the soul gone." "So we're saying no?" Patricia asked. "We're saying hell no," I replied. "But more than that, we're going to show them why their approach is wrong. If they want to play in the Colorado market, they're going to have to compete with us directly."
The plan I outlined was ambitious to the point of seeming reckless. Instead of selling, we would accelerate our expansion. 3 new restaurants in the next 18 months, each one designed to dominate a specific market segment. A high-end steakhouse to compete with traditional fine dining establishments, a casual bistro targeting the lunch crowd, and most ambitiously, a food hall concept that would showcase multiple local vendors under one roof. We're going to show them that authentic, locally focused hospitality will always beat corporate efficiency, I said. And we're going to do it by being so successful that they can't ignore us. The team was energized but concerned about the financial implications. Expanding that aggressively would require significant capital investment, and we'd be competing directly with well-funded corporate chains that had decades of experience in market domination. "What if we fail?" Patricia asked bluntly. "What if we overextend ourselves and lose everything?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself since rejecting Henderson's offer. The safe play was obvious. Take the $18 million, invest it conservatively, and live comfortably for the rest of my life. The risky play was to bet everything on my belief that authentic hospitality could triumph over corporate mediocrity. Then we fail spectacularly, I said finally, but we fail on our own terms, building something we believe in rather than selling out to something we don't. The first challenge came sooner than expected. Within a week of rejecting their buyout offer, the Henderson Group announced plans to open 4 new restaurants in Denver, each one strategically located to compete directly with my establishments. They had deeper pockets, established supply chains, and proven systems. I had passion, local knowledge, and a chip on my shoulder the size of the Rocky Mountains. The war for Denver's restaurant scene was about to begin, and I was determined to win it using the same weapons that had gotten me this far: stubbornness, creativity, and an absolute refusal to accept anyone else's limitations on what I could achieve. As I watched the sun set behind the mountains from my office window that evening, I realized that success hadn't made me soft. If anything, it had made me hungrier. The girl who'd been told she wasn't welcome at her own family's table was now protecting a business empire worth 9 figures, and she wasn't about to let corporate raiders take it away without a fight. The real battle was just beginning.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.